So my talk is entitled Miracles, Powers and Laws of Nature, Philosophical Explorations. So what I want to do is to explore from a philosophical perspective the relation between, on the one hand, miracles and laws of nature, and on the other hand, miracles and powers. I want to start by sharing an observation. So I checked how others approach the topic, so the go-to sources, and I want to start by sharing an observation, and you see quickly that there's a certain pattern to it. So here's a first example, a leading science and theology textbook called God, Humanity, and the Cosmos, and Christopher Southgate says at the beginning of the section on miracles, the first point to make about miracles is that definition is all important. And the first definition that we get is hume. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. And then at the end of the section, Southgate presents his own view, namely a miracle is an extremely unusual event, unfamiliar in terms of naturalistic explanation, which a worshipping community takes to be specially revelatory of the divine grace. So this is a first example. This is a second example, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The first sentence is, a miracle is an event that is not explicable by natural causes alone, as we saw before. And first definition that we get, Hume again. And then Timothy McGrew, in reference to Thomas Aquinas, proposes at the end of the section his own understanding, namely an event that exceeds the productive powers of nature. And third example, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Philosophical discussions center about two overlapping issues, conceptual and epistemological. And in this talk, I'm concerned only with the conceptual. So what kind of definition do we have of a miracle? Not with the epistemological dimension. So Hume also has an epistemological argument. Are we ever justified in believing about miracles? I would say nothing about that element, simply about the conceptual work. And once again, the question is, whether a miracle must be contrary to law, must it in particular be a violation of a natural law? And if so, is that coherent? And so there we are giving the famous footnote to the previous definition that we saw, namely a transgression of a law of nature by a particular volition of the deity or by the interposition of some invisible agent. So the pattern that we see is definition is all important, and the definition that we are given is Hume. And a miracle is a violation of the law of nature. And that's, in a sense, the starting point, or to put it differently, the default position of the debate. Okay. So before I go and address the issue, I want to simply contextualize it within the contemporary science and theology debate. So it's a common place to distinguish between, on the one hand, general divine action, which basically refers to creation and conservation, and then special divine action, which is a divine action that goes beyond creation and conservation. And miracles are a non-coextensive subset of SDA. So SDA and miracles are not the same, but it's one species of special divine action. And then there are three kinds of special divine action. Special can refer to the human response to an event, then it's called subjective SDA. The function this event has within God's bringing about an overall purpose, functional SDA, or can be special because of a difference in causation, that's objective SDA. And that's what most people want in the divine action debate. I also put here on the slide Thomas Aquinas, because I think that Thomas Aquinas thinks about it slightly differently. Namely, you have creation and the doctrine of providence, and conservation, although it's the continuation of the act of creation, it would be the first effect of government as the execution of providence. And so it would be part of the doctrine of providence. And the important point for us today is number two, namely divine causation of divine primary causation with or without secondary causation. So that is what I'll be talking about. And two is by definition a miracle. And I'll come to that at the end of the talk. I'll return to that question. Good. So starting point for my presentation then is what Lowe called the mainstream view. namely David Hume in an inquiry concerning human understanding, chapter 10 of Miracles says, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and then in the footnote he specifies a transgression of a law of nature by a particular volition of the deity or by the interposition of some invisible agent. And I will point out that I think there are two dimensions to this. One is a violation of a law or a transgression of a law, which I take to be synonyms. And the second one, this transgression is brought about by God or any other invisible agent. Now, we can bracket it off. I will only speak about God, although other people kind of extend it. Okay. So this is the mainstream view, the default position. And the first question I want to ask is, can we break a law, and what kind of law can we break? So it's clear to me that we can break or violate a moral or legal law. So if the law states that I must not drive faster than 50 kilometers per hour and I drive 70, then I've broken the law. That might include positive law, natural law, divine law, and so on and so forth. But it's not that clear to me that one can break or violate a law of nature. And there are two dimensions here, I think. And the first question is, what conception of laws of nature would make a law violation conceivable? And the second, which I think is slightly different, what conception of divine action would make a divine violation of these laws conceivable? So even if we have a concept of law of nature which can be broken, it's not clear that God can break it, or to put it differently, that God can violate it, or yet in another sense, that God can do violence to that law of nature. So there are two elements, and I will focus on element one, but I want to leave you with a quote concerning element two by Michael Dodds, who says the following. Implicit in the concern that God's action not violate the laws of nature is the conviction that God could violate those laws. One cause can contradict another, however, only if they are of the same sort, only if they are univocal. If two causes are of different orders, if one transcends the other, their respective causalities cannot be understood univocally, but only analogously. So I guess the point he is making is that if we understand divine causation and natural causation to operate not on the same causal level, but on different causal levels, it's not clear what it even could mean that one violates the other. In other words, if we uphold the traditional distinction between primary and secondary causation, it's really hard to understand how God can violate any kind of law in that sense, natural law. Okay, but as I said, I will focus on number one, not on number two. And here's an argument I want to explore with you. Let's call it the law violation argument. There are different formulations. This is how I would formulate it. Premise one, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. And as you can see, this is simply what Hume says. Second premise, a violation of the laws of nature cannot occur. Therefore, conclusion, a miracle cannot occur. And now I want to go through different responses to this argument, and we'll see that some accept premise one, and therefore, if they want to have miracles, reject premise two. But the majority of cases will reject. Some accept premise one and would therefore reject two, but most would disagree with Hume's way of putting it and would do it the other way around. So I'll start with the ones that reject premise two. That is to say, they accept Hume's position. And here would be one example, Richard Swinburne, in The Concept of Miracle, 1970. He would argue that the laws of nature can be violated, and miracles are violations of the laws of nature. Here's a quote. Miracle is a violation of a law of nature by a god. And then he explains what he means by a violation of the law of nature, namely, quote, an occurrence of a non-repeatable counter-instance to a law. So basically, he's suggesting that there are two kinds of counter-instances. One is a repeatable counter-instance, and the other one is a non-repeatable counter-instance. And so if you can repeat that counter-instance, then it disproves the law. So if you can replicate it, then that shows that the law must be wrong. But he argues if you can't repeat it, if you can't replicate it, then it doesn't disprove the law. And he argues that miracles are counter instances that are non-repeatable. And then he says about these non-repeatable counter instances, any exceptions to its operation cannot be accounted for by any other formula which could be taken as a law. So basically he's saying that these non-repeatable counter instances, they cannot be the basis for reworking the law because they only happened once, and so then there's no problem with it. There are two observations I want to share with you about Swinburne's position. And the first one is he says that what is sometimes called the Humean view, namely the exceptional regularity view, so the understanding that laws of nature are exceptionless regularities, he says, on this view, you cannot make sense of a miracle. I want to make sense of a miracle, therefore this view is wrong. So that's a bit of a slippery slope. The second point I want to make is that in the introduction, he says, and this is what I want to challenge in this talk, in the introduction, he says, modern science is phrased in terms of laws of nature. So if you want to go with a modern scientific understanding of the world, you have to accept laws of nature. And what we have to reject is this ancient idea of natures or powers or dispositions. So get rid of them. And by this presentation, I want to suggest that at least, no, not at least, that the question of what a law is very much on the agenda again. And there are dispositional approaches and power ontology approaches very much on the rise again. So I think that maybe this was true in the 1970s, but it's certainly not true today again. So I want to explore this alternative field. Okay, so this is rejecting premise 2. Now, here are a couple of versions or arguments that would reject premise 1, namely Hume's framing of the problem. So miracles do not violate the laws of nature, and in fact, violations of the laws of nature are not even possible on 4 different versions I want to explore. So this is a quick overview, and I would then go into each position in turn. So violations of the laws of nature are not possible if A, laws of nature are exceptionless generalizations, for every exception would disprove the law. B, if laws of nature do not entail regularities, for interventions could not be rendered impossible on the basis that all events must be instances of regularity of succession. C, if laws of nature apply only to causally closed systems, for whenever nature intervenes externally, the system is then not causally closed. And D, if the laws of nature are the laws of natures, and I mean here Aristotelian natures, something like Aristotelian natures, that is, if powers and dispositions, rather than ontological laws, account for the causal structure of the world, for then, and we'll see that this is true only in some instances, but not in all, what might have looked like a violation of some natural law will have to be regarded as an interference of yet another power. So this is simply the overview, and this is what I will now go through step by step. So let's start with the first position that is sometimes said to be a Humean position, but the problem is if this is Hume's position, then why would he present an argument to the effect that one is never justified in believing in a miracle if it's logically impossible? But this is something that I will not discuss here. So the position is, the problem is this. So if a miracle is, by definition, a violation of the law of nature, so if you go with Hume, and you also, and this is now the theory about the laws of nature, hold that the laws of nature are exceptionless regularities or generalizations, all F's are G's, then miracles are, by definition, logically impossible. That is to say, if a law is an exceptionless generalization, then you cannot have an exception. And here's how Lowe puts it. If L is a putative law and M a purported miracle violating L, one may only judge either that M did occur, thereby constituting a counter instance to L, which accordingly cannot be regarded as a true law, or that L is true and hence that M as a purported exception to L did not occur, or else that neither L is true nor M occur. What one cannot consistently judge is that both L is true and M occurred. So basically, he's saying, if you say that something is a law and a law cannot have an exception, and you have an exception, then you have a problem. So either you have to say it's not a law or it's not an exception, or you can say, well, both are wrong, right? The exception is wrong and the law is wrong. But you cannot hold the law and the exception if you define a law as something that cannot, by definition, have an exception. Interestingly enough, so this is a quote from Archer in his recent book, this doesn't necessarily preclude divine intervention, even though it makes miracles logically impossible. So he argues that special divine acts can take place in our universe, but such events would be part of the law of nature themselves. So if God were to intervene, then his action would become part of the ultimate generalization G star that holds without exception. So it's not, even though miracles are logically impossible, it's not clear that God cannot interfere if you make that part of the exceptionless law. So this would be a first response rejecting premise one. Here's a second one. This was proposed by von Wachter about the regularity view. So regularity view holds that laws of nature entail regularities. So events of type X are followed by events of type Y. And then he says, and this is a second premise, that every event is an instance of a regularity of succession. So it's always followed by type Y. And he argues in this paper that miracles do not violate because the laws of nature, because they do not in fact entail regularities or these regularities of succession. So here's a quote: miracles are not violations of the laws of nature. Miracles are also not exceptions to the laws, nor do they not apply to them. So this will be the next theory that we'll discuss. The laws of nature never have exceptions. They never are violated or suspended, are probably necessary and changing, and apply also to divine interventions. We need to reconsider not miracles, but laws. Laws of nature do not entail regularities, and therefore miracles do not violate laws. So basically, his point is, if we should understand laws as not implying regularities of succession, so it's not the case that type X events are always followed by type Y events, then there's no problem. And he then says, but the application of a theory, so this is a second dimension, which he calls equations of motions, there we might have a problem, and there he holds that we should have a provision. Namely, an event X is of type, if an event of type X and no further things are affected, what follows, then an event of type Y will follow. This is something that we'll see in the next theory, but I simply wanted to mention it because it's yet another approach, even though it might not be kind of a commonly shared approach. So this, however, is a common approach in the debate. And people like C.S. Lewis, Alvin Plantinga, William Alston all hold the same view. And here is a quote from C.S. Lewis' famous book, Miracles. All interferences leave the law perfectly true, but every prediction of what will happen in a given instance is made under the provision, other things being equal, or if there are no interferences. So basically, they're saying that each law has a provision, and the provision says, provided nothing interferes. And so then in this next quote, he says that the better we know the law, the better we know the kind of apparent exception. But as physicists or scientists, we cannot know is whether an additional power, say a divine power, interfered or not. Here's a more formal way of putting the same idea. So the natural laws describe how the world works. Quote, when or provided that the world is a causally closed system, subject to no outside causal influence. So in other words, the laws of nature are silent on causes where the system is not causally closed. And whether the system is causally closed or not, Alvin Plantinga argues, is a metaphysical or theological add-on that cannot be inferred or directly kind of reasoned towards from the sciences themselves. So this is something that we have to settle in philosophy or theology, but not in science itself. So this is a way he would put it. So laws of nature. For each law of nature, P, we would have when the universe is causally closed, then P, or when God does not act specially in the world, then P. And he would say that this holds for both what he calls the modern scientific view and the contemporary scientific view, with the difference that this provision is needed in the modern scientific view, but it's not clear that it's needed in the contemporary scientific view, because their laws of nature, at least in quantum physics, and you can ask Father Thomas about that later on, even without the provision, they assign a spectrum of probabilities to possible outcomes. And the question is, well, are all miracles possible or only some? Alvin Plantinga has a section in there where he kind of cites a few specialists on the issue. Some say, well, all biblical miracles are explainable this way. Others disagree. As I said, please ask Father Thomas after the talk. Good. So this would be the laws of nature apply only to causally closed systems view in a more formalized way. Good. As I said, the one purpose of my talk is, in a sense, to challenge at least this assumption of Richard Swinburne that if we want to go with the time and be scientifically informed about it, then we must phrase it in terms of laws of nature and must not under any circumstances speak about laws of nature or dispositions or powers, because it's outmoded, outdated, and an idea of the past. So here are two philosophers, Lowe and Mumford, and they both can be grouped under the broad label of dispositionalism and powers ontology. Now, kind of some would want to distinguish the two and have very many different kind of subcategories. For the purpose of my talk, I'd simply group them all together. And I chose them because I think that it's a nice way of showing that within this broad category, you can have very different intuitions about Hume. And the intuition of Lowe is to accept premise one, to accept that a miracle is a violation of a law of nature. And the intuition of Mumford is not to accept it and to go with the second clause. So I said at the beginning that in this footnote, you have a transgression of the law of nature, that is to say, a violation by God or by an intervention. And so basically, Lowe would go with A and Mumford would go with B. So Lowe says a miracle is that which violates the entire system of natural laws. And Mumford says that miracles are natural events or facts which have a supernatural cause. And there's no law violation in there. And it seems to me that that's a good way of approaching the topic today. So being critical about laws of nature and starting to question what that actually entails metaphysically. So here's the first kind of theory within that broad set of dispositionalism, the so-called normative concept of laws of nature. And the law, according to this concept, tells us how a normal individual of a certain substantial kind typically behaves or interacts because of its dispositions and causal powers. So we have substances, and substances are of a particular kind, of a particular natural kind. And each substance of a particular natural kind has certain powers or dispositions. And these certain powers or dispositions tend to behave in a certain way under certain kind of conditions. And the important point here is that we're talking about dispositional versus occurrent predictions. So we're talking about laws of nature statements about what sort of thing can do and not what they actually do right now. So water might have the power to dissolve, say, a pill, even though it's not actually right now dissolving that pill. So we're talking about dispositionalism here, dispositional statements, not factual ones. And so given that, here's how Lowe would understand the law of nature. This is the second quote on the slide. A statement of natural law, a nomological statement, or normative statement, characteristically implies that normal or typical individuals or exemplars of some recognizable natural kind possess a certain dispositional property, that is, are disposed to behave or appear in a certain way, usually in certain specifiable conditions. So once again, we see this idea. We have individuals or substances, they are of a natural kind. Because they are so, they have certain what he calls dispositional properties, and these dispositions or powers tend to behave in a certain way under certain conditions. And now he's saying that we can distinguish normal from abnormal cases. So the example that he gives are the law, ravens are black. And the law, ravens are black, allows for exceptions, for example, albino ravens, that is, exceptions that do not constitute a subspecies of ravens that are normally non-white. So swans are white and swans are black. So there you would have kind of a different class, and both are normal. But in case of ravens, I don't know about the biology there, but it seems to be that ravens are black, and you cannot turn that into a law. So albino ravens are not natural; they are an exception to the rule. And so, if you cannot turn that exception into a normal subspecies, that would be the kind of abnormal kinds or abnormal instances or individuals or exemplars. And he suggests that to come now to miracles, that miracles have to do with this distinction. Okay, so a miracle is what violates the laws of nature, but not any particular laws of nature. So what he says here in the quote, a miracle is not merely that which violates or constitutes an exception to. So you see here when he talks about violation, he simply means there's an exception to the law. And the question is it an abnormal case, or is it a normal case in which we have to rework the law? To this or that particular true natural law, but rather it is that which supposedly violates the entire system of law. So he would define a miracle as something that doesn't go against the law ravens are black, but about the entirety of laws that we know. That is to say, in these cases, we know that we don't have any natural explanation. That's what he says in the next part of the quote. A general miracle would be an abnormal phenomenon, and here it's important that it's not a normal, because then we have to rework the law. An abnormal phenomenon which altogether eludes natural explanation, and that's what he thinks is a miracle. And if there is no natural explanation, then we can say, well, it was God. On this account, a miracle can occur, and the law to which it is exception can be true. So we have a law, and if it's an abnormal case, then we can have the exception to that law, provided that the phenomena could not be represented as evidence of the truth of some rival natural law incompatible with the putative law. So the difference between here, ravens are black and swans are white, that kind of example. Okay, so that would be a first response, accepting Hume within the dispositional camp. Now I want to move to the second response within the dispositional camp that does not accept Hume. So Stephen Mumford argues that there are necessary connections in nature. These necessary connections in nature are grounded in powers. So he expresses this in terms of powers rather than dispositions here, at least in this paper. But he says there are no laws in nature. So in a sense, he eliminates laws. They are, in a sense, there, but they do not prescribe. They describe, and they describe powers. They describe dispositions. So here's the quote. Denial of any universal governing or controlling features in nature, features which in some original sense of law could be described as laws. Many features are to be found in nature that involve regularity, universality, and modality, so necessity and contingency, and he even allows for an in-between position. Are there laws besides, or are laws just exactly these features? I answer both questions in the negative. There are not laws in nature. They are not laws in nature in the strong and we might claim original sense of law. What we have are laws, which is simple ascriptions of dispositions of a sort or kinds or laws of nature based on the dispositional properties. And for the purpose of this talk, it's basically the same idea. We don't need to distinguish the positions here. Okay, so what does he do now with the miracles? As I said, he doesn't accept Hume, so basically he has to explain it in different terms, and this is his definition. A miracle is by definition a natural event E with a supernatural cause ES. So that's a short and straightforward definition, but I think there's a problem with it. The first one is by natural event, he means natural as opposed to supernatural event. That's, I think, a good distinction because we don't want to have things like justification included in there, which he wouldn't on this account. The second one is he allows for supernatural causes to include angels and other supernatural agents. And the third point is, I think, the thing that makes me wonder if this is the right approach. Namely, he argues that the supernatural cause can be both necessary and sufficient or only necessary. That is to say, it can be unmediated or mediated divine action. So a natural event can be caused exclusively by God or mediately by God, and both would by definition be a miracle, which in a sense brings up the topic that we discussed before, namely, is every ordinary government then a miracle? And on his account, creation and conservation, at least as far as it's unmediated, would by definition constitute a miracle. So we would have creation as miracle, conservation as miracle, and even worse than that, everything that follows from creation and conservation, all natural events, would be by definition a miracle. And the latter he doesn't want to have, so he introduces a second distinction where he says a miracle is by definition a natural event, E with a supernatural cause ES, and there are no further natural causes, E1 to En, in the natural chain between ES and E. So basically he is here restricting it to unmediated or direct divine intervention. But it's still the case that creation and conservation, as far as unmediated, is counted as a miracle, and that strikes me as counterintuitive. So what can we do about this? Is there a way of basically saying what a miracle is within this fourth camp? The laws of nature are the laws of natures, without these problematic conclusions. And that's what I want to explore in the final 10 minutes. So building now on what Ignacio did before, I think that we have to see what kind of miracles we want to have included, because that affects then how we build our definition. So supranatural miracles would be, this is how I would put it, God causes events which nature in no way is able to cause. Then contra natura miracles, God causes events in a way that nature is not able to cause them. And praeta natura miracles, God causes events without secondary causes or that exceed the power of secondary causes. Now, the reason why I included two versions here is because I was thinking about cases where a miracle might be indistinguishable from other cases. And I'm not sure whether to allow it or not. So the case would be this: you have two patients and both are healed, and they're indistinguishable in a sense, but one is through natural powers and the other one is performed as a miracle by God. And then you could say, well, the one was faster than the other or needs to be distinguished in some way. But if we allow for miracles where you have two cases and they're, in a sense, indistinguishable, the only difference would be to say that one is immediately caused by God and the other not, then you need the first option here, because then it doesn't make sense to say it exceeds the power of God if nature can produce the same. So this is simply, we can talk about this in the Q&A if this is actually needed or not. Otherwise, we can simply drop it and go with condition 2. Okay. So it seems to me that this is now building on what Ignacio did before, that there's something like an epistemological approach in Aquinas, in lack of a better word. A miracle is a certain kind of phenomenon, the cause of which is unknown in principle. So this is why I said it's an ontological. And it seems to me that at least in some cases, Aquinas adds a second element, namely in which the natural disposition of the causally relevant factors do not correspond to the effect that is manifested in the phenomenon. And it seems to me that condition one is sufficient, but I'm not sure that it's necessary, at least if we don't specify it as unknown absolutely or unknown as a principal cause. Because if you have an instrumental use, then the instrument that is used is known in principle, and only the instrumental cause is unknown. So that would be, perhaps there's a way of reworking it, but the second condition, I don't think that that's necessary or sufficient if we allow for cases where God, as we had before, gives the creature a new form, because then the disposition changes, and so it can't go against the natural disposition because we have a new disposition. There might be a way of reworking it too, but at least as I put it here, that doesn't work. So then there's also an ontological approach, and this is what I want to propose now. So it seems to me that if we say the laws of nature are laws of natures, then we can express miracles in terms of powers. So a miracle is an event performed exclusively by the power of God. And now you might reply, well, not every event, only those events that in a certain case belong to, a certain sense belong to the order of nature. So not creation, not justification. And then you can say, well, a miracle is a natural event performed exclusively by the power of a miracle. And so then you can say, well, but it's not comparison to God's power, it's in comparison to natural powers. That is to say, if you don't have natural powers in there, then you can't see how it exceeds it. So then we can say, M4, a miracle is a natural event performed exclusively by the power of God that exceeds the power or powers of nature. And here, this is something that I don't know. Should we allow for cases where it's indistinguishable? If we want, then I suggest the following. A miracle is a natural event performed exclusively by the power of God that either exceeds the power of nature, or if it does not exceed in principle the powers, it does not in this instance involve secondary causes, so powers of nature. And then comes the really difficult question of mediation. So is it ever possible to have a mediation? I think Aquinas thinks so. And then this would be my suggestion as a first approximation. And we can talk about this in the Q&A if this actually works. So a miracle is a natural event performed by the power of nature, either A, exclusively, or B, as a principal cause, using the powers of nature instrumentally, that either exceeds the power of nature, or if it does not exceed in principle the power of nature, it does not in this instance involve the powers of nature. So what I wanted to have is you have the power of God and the power of nature, but you don't have the laws of nature in there, so that you can make this a dispositional, or open this for a dispositional conversation. What I'm not sure is what Father Justin mentioned before. Should we build in a theological dimension too, namely that it's significantly religiously significant, or that it has this personal relationship built into that? I don't know. It seems to me that it makes a lot of sense, but from a theological perspective, and so that's an open question. Okay, so final two slides. So I'm now trying to bring together some of the insights from the dispositional camps and from how I understand miracles, and to combine the two. So there are two triads in Aquinas. The first one is forma inclinatio operatio, and the second one essentia virtus operatio. So form, inclination, operation, and essence, power and operation. And so it seems to me that what we could say about miracles is the following. So operations are the actualization or manifestation of powers. These powers are grounded in the agent's nature. That is, laws of nature are a description of the laws of natures. And by this, I mean they're grounded in the substantial form of powers. In the substantial form of agents. Then these powers tend to manifest themselves in certain ways, as we saw both in Lowe and Mumford. They have certain manifestation conditions, and we have always, things are always embedded in a network of powers. And so other powers can interfere and prevent or bring about these manifestations. And I would think of God performing a miracle as being yet another power, but not in the sense of a secondary cause, but as a primary cause. And as a primary cause, he can do two things. I think the first one is to change the very form and consequently the natural operation, inclination, or the operation itself, so preventing an operation from happening. So in summary, agents act by virtue of their powers. Now, I think that given what Michael Dodd said, we should also include the distinction between primary and secondary causation. And this is basically what Ignacio explained in great detail before, how we could do that, namely to say that God gives creatures their powers, he upholds them being, he applies them to act, and he uses them instrumentally. So here we have primary and secondary causation built into, so God doesn't act at the same level as creaturely powers or creaturely agents do. These powers are grounded in the creature's natures or the substantial form. Powers tend to manifest themselves, and they have certain manifestation condition. But the network allows for an interference of other powers, and they can either prevent or prevent or bring about the manifestation of them. And I think that if that works within the network of natural causes, why shouldn't that work in case of God? Thank you.